This is part 2 of the Craftsman Emerson 150 Drill Press Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 1, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we're going to continue with the disassembly. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Well, I forgot to hit record, so I'm just going to show you this, but we're going to remove the model number panel from the base, and I've already removed it, but this is how you do it. It's held in there by 2 drive screws, and you just knock those drive screws out from the back side with a small punch. So, too easy. You'll see me take off the headband later, and it's the same process. So here we are with the head, and the first thing we're going to do is clean out those side holes that have the machine screws in them. Now, these machine screws go into the head casting and sit directly above the bottom bearing on the spindle pulley assembly. So they hold the spindle pulley inside the head casting. So right now, I can't even see the heads on those screws. They're a flat tip or a slotted head. And I'm trying to clean them out enough that I can see the head on them. Sometimes these are broken off or they're stripped off. If that's the case, then your best bet is to just drive the spindle pulley out like you'll see me doing a little bit here and break them off the rest of the way, and then try to remove them by either screwing them further in or drilling and tapping them. But it turns out that both of these have the heads on them, and I'm able to actually get to those heads and clean them up a little bit. So I've got a flat tip on the end of this T-handle, and I'm applying some downward force and twisting it. And this one comes out pretty decently. Also, these can get bent a lot of times if people have tried to remove the spindle pulley assembly without removing these screws. And I've got a video that covers what these screws do and where they are located and all of that kind of stuff, and a cutaway view of it. I'll put a link to that here. So here I'm just magnetizing a screwdriver so that we can lift that screw out of there once we've got it completely unscrewed. Like so. The other side, the head was a little bit more boogered up. The slot on it was barely even there. But eventually I'm able to get a bite on it and get it to turn without stripping. Now, if you do end up having to drill and tap, and you end up not being able to retap it the same size, which is an 8/32 tap or thread. So if you have to go up in a size, my recommendation would be to go to the next size metric rather than going another full size up in standard. But it's best to try to get these out and not have to do any drilling and tapping. So take the time to work on it and see if you can get them out of there without having to do that. And you just want to apply some good downward force as you're turning this. Once you get it spinning, it should come out of there pretty decently if it's not bent. So as I said before, If yours are bent or they're broken off or they won't come out, watch that other video that I've got a link for talking about the internal parts here so that you understand what you're dealing with before you try to tackle it. So, like I said, we were able to get both of them out without having to drill and tap. There it is. And they weren't even bent, so surprise. Next, we can go ahead and drive the spindle pulley assembly out. So I'm just using a wooden dowel here on the bottom of the spindle insert part of the spindle pulley assembly. And it's got two bearings on it, and you'll see that in that other video. And I've got the first bearing out, so now I'm just lining up the second bearing with the top bore, and then we're going to continue to drive it out of there. And you'll see it pop out on the left side of the head here. There it goes. So there's your spindle pulley assembly, and you can see there's two bearings there. So the bottom bearing on that spindle pulley assembly rests on that outer snap ring. We're just going to remove that outer snap ring with a pair of needle nose pliers. There it is. And then we're ready to go ahead and remove the headband. So this is the same way that we would have removed the model number panel. You've got drive screws, and the holes for those drive screws go all the way through the casting, so you can attack it from the inside with a small punch. I don't know, I think this is like a 1/16 of an inch punch. I'm just using a pair of vice grips to hold on to it, and then I can smack the vice grips. You'll see the headband kind of spring loose there. And then the same for this side. And this is the same way to remove the headband on a 100. The only difference would be that you have the Craftsman logo above the headband on the front of the head casting, and you remove it the same way. All right, so we've got this broken off screw here that holds the rod for the motor mount on the right side of the head casting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to center punch it. There's a spring-loaded punch. So this screw is a 5/16 by 18 thread, and I'm using a 1/4 inch bit right here. So I don't want to drill out too far and start messing up the threads. And I'm trying to use one of these screw extractors from Craftsman. Lots of brands have kind of the same thing, but this just fails. I've never had them work for me, and maybe they work great in wood, but I even took the extractor out of the drill and put it in this tap handle, and still nothing. So I decided to go ahead and drill out the entire screw, still with the 1/4 inch drill, so that I'm not, if I can keep it level and away from the walls of the hole, I won't be boogering the threads and I won't have to re-tap it. I'm able to drill it out all the way down to where that rod is. And I've got a little movement on the rod. Of course, it's nice and rusted in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to tap that rod out, because the end of that rod is actually exposed inside the head casting. So we can tap it out I don't know, an inch or two maybe before it goes into the head casting part that we can't get to. So I'm using a brass rod here and I'm just tapping that rod. Of course, I heated all that up with a torch. You can see the rod starting to protrude out the back. So once we've got it moved a good bit, I'm going to go ahead and coat all that with WD-40, put the rod back in, and then try to tap it back out. That hopefully will loosen it up enough that I can stick a small rod in the holes that are in that rod for the roll pin and kind of twist it out of the head casting, or at least that's my plan. So here I'm twisting it, and now I'm twisting and pulling to get it out of there. There we go. And it actually, I didn't even drill into it. It's got some markings on there where the screw was hitting it, but I didn't drill into it. So we've still got a lot of material on the threads from the original screw. So we're going to heat all that up. And then we're going to run a tap. Same 5/16 by 18 thread tap all the way down in there. And that should force all the material that's stuck in the threads out of there and out the bottom and into the opening that that rod was sitting in. And if this works, then we didn't have to retap anything. We're just cleaning the existing threads. Now, I will say that if you end up having to tap and go one size bigger, that I recommend you do that for both sides then, because it doesn't make sense to have one side be one thread and the other side be a different thread. And that screw thread's in there just fine. So we're golden. What a pain in the butt. Okay, so here we are with the spindle pulley assembly, and those two bearings are held on the assembly by an inner snap ring. And we're going to try to get that off of there. Sometimes the back side of that snap ring kind of sticks inside the little trench or groove or cutout that it's riding in. So removing it at this angle and then pushing down as we're spreading the snap ring is a little easier to get it off of there. There it is. So now we've got two bearings and there's a spacer between the two bearings. So to remove the top or the bottom bearing, it's the top as we're looking at it, but it's actually the bottom bearing. I'm using this 2-arm puller. We're just going to twist it off of there. There it is. Then we can pull that spacer off, and then we're going to lift this second bearing, the top bearing, with 2 wrenches, being careful not to bend the sheaves on the pulley. That allows enough room for those arms to get up under that bearing, and then we'll twist it off of there as well. Too easy. That is all you're going to disassemble there. So here we have the quill and spindle assembly, and we're going to remove the depth stop rod. So to do this, we remove the nut and lock washer and screw that are in the feed stop bracket, and then we undrew the nut on the bottom of the depth stop rod. And then the rod will come straight out of there. Next, we'll slide the quill gasket off the quill. And then we need to get that drill bit or drill, depending on who you talk to, out of this rusted chuck. So trying to get this key to fit in here and see if we can work the chuck. And I'm able to get it turning. And there goes that bit or drill. Next, we've got the spindle collar, and it has a set screw in it. So we're removing the set screw. And we're going to attempt to remove that collar, but it is really on there. And that's because of how pitted and corroded the splines are on the spindle here. So that collar has to slide all the way off of there. So I think the best way we're going to tackle this is to sand down those splines a little bit, get some of that pitting and corrosion down. And we'll put this in a vise, and we're going to drive the spindle down through the bearings that are in the quill and through that spindle collar. Now, under that spindle collar, there is a shim, which I don't know if they call it a washer or not. And then there's a rubber washer. So we'll lube it up a little bit with some WD-40. Now, if you're going to do this, you're going to want to use a non-marring hammer, like this rubberized dead blow that I have, because we don't want to mushroom the spindle top in any way. I'm going to get some height so I can get some swing on this thing, because it is really in there. And you can see it popping out down at the bottom. All right, now that I've got it flush with the collar, I'm going to use a brass rod or a brass punch, and I'm kind of standing weird right here because I've got my leg under the spindle because I don't want it to fall and hit my concrete floor. But there's your collar. There's the shim or washer, and there is the rubber washer, which is nice and stuck to the spindle collar. Like so. All right, so let's continue driving the spindle through that top bearing and then eventually through the bottom bearing. We need a longer rod. And this is because of all of that crap and corrosion that's on the splined area of the spindle. So now we can kind of pull it, maybe smack it some more. And there it is. All right, so now what we've got is a quill that has bearings stuck in both ends. So to get these bearings out of here, what you're going to want to do is put it in a vise and get some sort of a rod. I'm going to use a wooden dowel that's small enough to fit inside the hole, or maybe I'll use the brass rod that you can tilt once it's through one of the bearings. So now it's resting on the other bearing and we smack the bearing out. Then we flip it over and we can use a bigger rod now and smack the other bearing out. Obviously, you're going to have to replace those bearings. And when you do, make sure you get the proper bearings that have a 5/8 inner bore. So we need to remove the feed stop bracket, and it's stuck on there. So I'm actually lifting up on the retaining ring that's on the quill, and that allowed me to put some leverage on the feed stop bracket and get it off of there. So now we'll remove that retaining ring, and to do that, we're just going to use 2 pair of vice grips. Grab it on each side where the opening is. Widen it and lift it off of there, like so. And that's everything for the quill. So next we're going to remove the chuck from the spindle. I'm just going to lube up that chuck since it's so rusty. And I'm going to chuck a 9mm Allen wrench in there. Then we're going to put the Allen wrench in the vise. I'm going to hit the safety lock collar with some heat here. You can see there's little holes in that safety lock collar. And that's what the little turn down area on the chuck key is for, but they never work right for me. So I've got a spanner wrench, and I'm trying to get it off with the spanner wrench, but it's definitely stuck. Won't go any further. So we'll loosen that back up. And then we're going to shoot some WD-40 in there. Work that around a little bit. And that's when I realized that the chuck had come loose on the Allen wrench. So I'm tightening that down. And now we'll try to work that safety lock collar off of there with the spanner wrench. And there we go. The spindle pulls right out of there. So there's your spindle taper. That's a Jacob's taper. And the thrust collar that's on the spindle. So now we can just go ahead and undo the chuck and pull that Allen wrench out of it. So next we need to remove that other rod from the motor mount. And we're going to do it kind of the same way we removed the first one. It's got that roll pin, which is a 1/4 inch roll pin. So we're going to hit it with some heat, and then we're going to drive that roll pin out of there. I didn't have it very tight in my vise, so it's already starting to tilt. So I'll have to get that squared away, and then I believe I end up using a slightly smaller punch. There, that roll pin is coming out. You can see it coming out the bottom. We've already cleared it enough that we can go ahead and pull the motor mount off of there. There we go. So now we just need to finish knocking that roll pin out of the rod. And we're done. So here we have the hub, spring, and pinion assembly. And we have the fiber washer. So all of your Emersons will have a fiber washer. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove those feed handles with the knobs still on them. They actually came out pretty easy. Next, you've got a pin, a 1/4 inch pin that has splines on one end that is holding the spring inside the pinion and the pinion inside the hub. So we're going to drive that pin out with the splines facing down. And then we can go ahead and pull the spring out of there. That spring is toast. And we'll put some PB Blaster on there. And then we're going to tap the hub off of the pinion using a brass tap or a brass punch. Once we get it tapped enough, we should be able to just twist it off of there. Like that. Aside from the chrome being gone, it's actually in pretty good condition. Good to go. So next, we're just going to remove the feed knobs off of the feed handles. We'll just put each one of those in the vise and twist the knobs off. All right, so the last thing we've got is the chuck disassembly. So I've got the jaws of the chuck protruding about a 1/2 inch out the front. They need to be protruding at least 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch. And I've got a socket sitting on them to protect them. Then I'm using a sleeve from another Jacob's chuck to compress the sleeve on the chuck we're disassembling off of the chuck. This thing really gets hung up on that second ring inside there. Now I've got a video all about the Jacob's chuck called the Jacob's Chuck Omnibus, and I'll link it here. That'll tell you everything you need to know about that chuck. It just needs to move another 1/8 of an inch and we'll be off of there, but it doesn't want to do it. I eventually get it. And you'll see it. There it is. So I can spin it freely. So yep, we're good. So now we pull the sleeve off of there. And then there's a split nut. Part of it just came out. There's 1/2 of the split nut. There's the other half. And then we've got the jaws. And these jaws, I'm just going to push them out with a punch. There's one. The second jaw needed a little help. So we'll just tap it out there. And then we got the third one out. And that's going to wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below. I will get to them as soon as I possibly can. In the next video, we will start tearing down the motor. So, yep, it's moving along. As always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you guys next time.